In 2006, the world stopped to witness one of the most stacked World Cups of all time. That tournament really felt like a movie crossover as you had legends from two different generations clashing while they were still at the highest level. On one side, you had the future leaders of our sport blossoming, like Ronaldo, Messi, Modric, Robben and Ribéry. On the other, you had legends about to reach their curtain call, like Figo, R9, Nedved, Del Piero and Zidane. It was a World Cup that left very little room for underdogs, but here I am, about to pull another inspirational story out of my ass. In case you missed it, Angola, one of the most meaningless sides in Africa from a football point of view, made it to that year's World Cup, upsetting several African giants along the way. It was a forgettable campaign, but hopefully I'll be able to make it a bit more memorable, just like I did with other runs in some of my other videos. So, in this video, I'll dive deep into what made Angola one of the toughest sides to beat in the early 2000s. I'll look into their best players, their iconic manager, and how the future looks pretty bright for the Palancas Negras. But first, let me give you some context. Angola was one of the last African countries to be granted independence. As a result, many talented Angolans played for the Portuguese national team, while their own clubs were merely used as feeder teams for the three giants. I mean, just look at their names: Sport Luanda e Benfica, Sporting Luanda, Benfica Nova Lisboa. Obviously, that set them back tremendously compared to other nations like Egypt, Nigeria or Cameroon, which started developing much earlier at all levels. Besides, Portugal doesn't have as much tradition in the sport as another major colonizer like England. British colonies got football ingrained in their society much more than the Portuguese ones, which was another contributing factor to their underdevelopment. Angolans knew it was never going to be easy competing against their African neighbors, let alone making it to a World Cup and standing their ground against the very best national teams. So, their 20-year journey through the desert didn't surprise anyone. But one day, seemingly out of nowhere, their fortunes changed. And it was all thanks to Luís Oliveira Gonçalves. Who? Unless you're an Angolan football fan, it's highly unlikely that you've ever heard about him, but the man had just the right coaching philosophy to deal with Angola's talent. After a modest start in Angola's lower divisions, Goncalves earned himself a position as technical advisor to his national team's under-15s. He wasn't even the head coach, but he got to spend time with the future of Angolan football. In fact, he did more than just spend time. Okay, now for real. He became a father figure to many kids who never had one. He instilled in them values that the current generation certainly lacked. And if you don't believe me, let me tell you that there was once a friendly match between Portugal and Angola that had to be abandoned because Angola didn't have enough players after receiving a bunch of red cards. They completely lost their mind and started going after the legs of the Portuguese players, and some even claimed that this was the payback for all they suffered during the Ultramar War. As the years passed, Goncalves guided his boys through each youth level until he finally got a big opportunity to truly showcase his work. In 2001, Angola qualified for Africa's Youth Championship. They weren't favorites by any means, as nations like Ghana, the Ivory Coast, and the eternal giants like Nigeria and Cameroon had much better squads on paper. But Goncalves was well aware of his boys' limitations, and instead of using them as an excuse to keep his job, he created a compact system that took advantage of their strong points while also widening their weaknesses. So he created a solid backline with his strong defenders and instructed his pacey wingers to always look out for an opportunity to run and quickly cross the ball. Of course, just because he had a plan in mind, it doesn't mean it was smooth sailing, not even against weaker teams. Angola lost against Swaziland in the qualifying stage, but managed to turn the tie around in the second match. It became apparent they weren't that efficient and had trouble putting weaker opponents away, but when they were faced with big nations, they became larger than life. In the actual tournament, Angola overcame a group composed of Ghana, Mali and Nigeria, famously beating the Eagles 2-0. As they reached the knockouts, Angola started playing like a powerhouse. They beat Ethiopia 5-2 in the semis and then in the final, despite playing against a Ghanaian squad that would later reach the quarterfinals of a World Cup. Angola nullified them and beat them 2-0 to win the trophy. It was by all means a massive win, but it was still seen as merely a continental triumph. If they couldn't hold their own in the FIFA Youth Championship, this would mean basically nothing. But surprisingly, Angola did really well. With the same group of players, headlined by Mendonça and Benfica prospect Mantorras, Angola surprised the world again by holding Czechia and Australia to a draw and beating Japan 2-0. That combination of results earned them first place in the group, but the hard task of surpassing the Netherlands' golden generation of Robben, van der Vaart and company. And ultimately, it was too much for the Palancas Negras. Nonetheless, they left a good image, and soon after, almost every player transitioned into the senior national team right on time for the next World Cup qualification cycle. However, just because they won a Continental Youth Tournament, it didn't mean Angola were suddenly the kings of Africa, destined to steamroll their way into the World Cup. I mean, let's be real, Angola were basically a squad full of green players who were just starting to go pro in Angola's first division or in Portugal's weakest first division teams. So, in a way, it wasn't that surprising when their journey to World Cup glory almost ended right before it even got started. Angola were beaten out by Chad in the first leg of the preliminary round 3-1, but that result was really a blessing in disguise. The humiliating loss prompted the much-needed replacement of their manager Ismael Kurtz with their legendary youth coach Luís Oliveira Gonçalves. And once again, Goncalves performed his usual magic and turned the tide around to take Angola to the group stage phase. Still, there were really no reasons to feel optimistic. Only the first place out of 6 nations would qualify, and Angola had to contend with continental powerhouses like Nigeria and Algeria. If you traveled across 1,000 different parallel universes, I'm confident Angola would not win this group in 99% of them. I mean, when it was all said and done, it was between Nigeria and Angola, or if you want a clear picture in your head, a top championship team versus a weak team from Portugal's second tier. But that weak team turned out to be a nightmare for Nigeria and pretty much everyone in their group, except Zimbabwe. For some reason they were pretty decent back then, they just didn't know how to defend. Either way, Angola finished the group level on points with Nigeria, and the reason they progressed over the Eagles was due to their head-to-head record. In their own match, Angola withstood Nigeria's pressure and beat them with a late goal courtesy of their star player Aqua. In their away fixture, Angola actually got off to an awful start when JJ Okocha put Nigeria ahead in their match and in the group. However, Angola didn't throw in the towel, and it was Figueiredo, a white man, who scored the equalizer. Some reports claim his goal created a huge fight between fans who were enraged that their World Cup aspirations had been ruined by a white man. Besides, there are literally no videos or images from this match, which makes it one of modern football's rare instances of lost media. Regardless, their job wasn't finished, and after such an inspirational rise, Angola almost threw it all away against Rwanda, a nation that is better known for being on Arsenal's sleeve than for any player that they ever produced. Fortunately, Aqua saved their asses again, and so Angola made history by making it to their first World Cup ever. It was an incredibly difficult feat that was outshined by the fact that in 2006, 4 out of Africa's 5 World Cup participants were debutants. But if you pay close attention to the 5 squads, Angola was by far the weakest. And when the World Cup groups were drawn, their run of 16 dreams became even more of an illusion. Considering they were paired with a nation that, the previous time they faced, they lost their mind and turned a friendly football match into a middleweight MMA bout, alongside a nation that has a weird fetish for qualifying to a World Cup only to make it exactly to the round of 16, let's just say they had the odds firmly stacked against them. But regardless of the odds, regardless of how difficult to beat your opponent seemed on paper, this was prime Angola. In goal, they had an unemployed guy who spent the entire 05-06 season solely focused on getting in the best shape possible for the World Cup. In defense, they had Kali, not this Kali, but he was strong as hell too. And Loco, who, well, had a nice haircut. In midfield, you'd find the joy of the squad in Mendonça, an immaculate dribbler in Zekalanga, while in attack they had Mateus, a guy that originated a decade-long court fight between 2 Portuguese clubs and that is still active to this day in one of my local teams. The first Portuguese-speaking dude to think about prolonging his career by scoring a bunch of goals against amateurs in the Middle East, and lastly but certainly not least, Mantorras, an extremely gifted baller who could only play for about half an hour due to a chronic knee injury. My description might not have painted them in the best light, but their valiant efforts in Germany certainly did more than my words ever could. First of all, they stood their ground against Portugal, redeeming themselves from the humiliating showing from 4 years prior. Then they got a goalless draw against Mexico, where João Ricardo, their unemployed 36-year-old keeper, was once again the man of the match. These results allowed what many consider the future punchy bags of the tournament to go into their final match with a decent chance of progressing against an already eliminated Iran. And for a few minutes, that dream was indeed a reality. Super sub Flavio came in and rocked the Iranians while Portugal was holding Mexico to a 2-1 deficit. Unfortunately, their joy was short-lived. Just 16 minutes later, Iran equalized and the scoreboard remained that way until the final whistle. Angola was so close to a potential meetup with Argentina in the round of 16, but they just didn't have it enough in them. In all honesty, it would be kind of unfair since Mexico played much better than both Angola and Iran. As much as I like a fairy tale ending, I'm also a realistic guy and Angola simply had no business being in the last 16. Now fast forward to 2024 and it's a completely different conversation. After almost 20 years longing for that brief period of glory, Angola now has all the tools to put up a good showing in the 2026 World Cup in the USA. They're currently the national team with the most wins in 2024 and they've been injected with several players with Angolan origins who played in the best academies in the world but wouldn't get called up by the countries where they were born. I'm talking about David Carmo, Jonathan Boato, Rui Modesto, Clinton Mata, Elder Costa, and maybe, just maybe, we could also see Florentino Luís join them as well. Their local talent pool has also grown considerably. Zito Luvumbo, Mbala Nzola are two Angolan-born players in the top 5 leagues, and there are way more quality players applying their trade in profitable markets like Gel Sandala, Lucas João, Show, and Bastos. Ironically, the mastermind behind the rise is also a coach who started off as Angola's youth national team manager, but thanks to his good results, Pedro Goncalves, yeah, they even have the same last name, was given the freedom to build his own project for Angola's football future. After a decent quarter-final finish in the AFCON earlier this year and a solid unbeaten record in the 2026 World Cup qualifiers, I think Angolans all around the world have every reason to feel positive about their future. But what do you think? Can Angola make it to the next World Cup? I certainly don't think it's that unlikely. At least not as unlikely as Latvia qualifying for a 16-team Euro Championship. If you think that's shocking, then check out the video I made about Latvia's unlikely journey to Euro 2004. If you've made it this far into this video, then I'm 100% certain that you'll love Latvia's story. I'll see you there.